In this lecture, we will add attributes for the header tools block. Not everyone wants to add a login button to their site. We should add the option to the link. As you can imagine, we can use the toggle control component to toggle the value. However, I want to explore other components. They may not be the best option, but we should use this opportunity to explore the various components offered by WordPress. The SelectControl Component is another component for adding a drop-down field. We can use this component for enabling or disabling the login link. Let's get started. Open the block.json file. First things first, we should add an attribute. Inside the attributes object, add an attribute called showAuth. Next, let's set the type to Boolean. For extra precaution, let's add a default value. The initial value for this attribute will be true. Our next step is to manipulate this attribute's value. Open the index.js file. As mentioned earlier, we are going to be using the SelectControl component for changing this attribute's value. This component can be imported from the components package. Let's update the import statement for this package to include the SelectControl component. At this point, you may be wondering, we can use a regular select element for changing values? The answer is yes. However, it would take more work. Additionally, WordPress will apply classes to the select element to match the current design of the editor. For this reason, using WordPress's components for building our block is the best option. Inside the edit function, let's extract the showAuth attribute from the attributes object. Our data is ready. The final step is to add the SelectControl component. Let's insert this component inside the panel body component. The component should replace the static text. The properties of this component are similar to other control components. We can add a label, initial value, and options to display in the dropdown. Let's start with the label by adding the label property. The value for this property will be the double underscore function. We are going to set the label to the following value: show login / register link. Next, let's set the value property to the attribute. We are going to add a property unfamiliar to us. Unlike other inputs, users cannot write a custom value. We can add values to the dropdown by adding a property called options. The value for this property will be an array. Inside this array, we can add objects. Each object will represent an option. Let's add an object with two properties called label and value. The label property's value will be displayed to the user. Since we're displaying text, let's use the double underscore function to translate it. For this example, let's set the label to no. As for the value property, it'll represent the value that gets stored in the attribute. Let's set this property to false. Next, we can add another object to enable this option. The label property should be set to yes. Lastly, the value property can be set to true. So far, so good. There's one last property to add. We must add the onChange event to update the attribute. Inside this event, we are going to add an arrow function to accept the new value. Things are about to get tricky. Before updating the attribute, let's log the data type of the value. Inside the body of the function, log the following value: type of new value. As a reminder, the type of keyword will return the data type of a variable. After making those changes, let's try testing the block. Refresh the Gutenberg editor in the browser. Next, add the header tools block. Upon selecting the block, the settings will appear on the sidebar. Under the General panel, our drop-down gets displayed. Behind the scenes, WordPress is using the select element. We can try toggling the value, but it won't be functional. That's to be expected since we haven't updated the attribute. More importantly, let's open the console panel in the developer tools. At the bottom of the console, the data type should be logged after attempting to change the dropdown. According to the console, the data type is a string. That's a huge problem. WordPress can be strict with its data types. In the block.json file, the data type of our attribute is a Boolean. If we were to attempt to update the attribute with the wrong data type, we may experience errors. The question is, why are we getting a different data type? By default, WordPress will convert the data type of a drop-down's value to a string. It doesn't matter if we're using a different data type in our options array. For this reason, the toggle control component is considered the best component for dealing with Boolean values. By default, this component converts a value to a Boolean. However, we're using the SelectControl Component to explore WordPress's components for rendering form elements. In addition, you may encounter this type of situation. There are developers who hate JavaScript because it can change a data type of a variable. We're experiencing this issue. It's a fact of life for JavaScript developers. In these cases, we can utilize a technique called typecasting. Typecasting is the process of converting a variable's data type to a different data type. It's common for JavaScript developers to perform this type of action. We can avoid this issue with the toggle control component. I think using the select control component gives us the opportunity to explore typecasting. There are different techniques for converting a variable's data type. There isn't a single solution for everything. Typically, you can look up a solution. For our case, we can perform type conversion by using a comparison operator. Around the new value argument, we are going to add a pair of parentheses. Next, we are going to use the equals 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 operator to compare the value with true. The comparison operators will always return a Boolean value. In this example, we are telling JavaScript to compare the new value argument with a string called true. After the comparison, the value will be returned. Therefore, the type of statement will check the data type of the returned value. Let's refresh the browser. Next, add the header tools block again. Let's try changing the values from the dropdown. This time, the data type of our attribute has changed to a Boolean. This is precisely what we were looking for. Let's update our function to set the attribute to the Boolean value. Switch back to the editor. We are going to replace the console statement with the setAttributes function. Next, we are going to wrap the value with an object. Inside this object, set the showOff attribute to the Boolean value. After making those changes, our block should be able to store the showOff attribute. Switch back to the browser. We are going to re-add the block after refreshing the page. From the drop-down, we are able to change the value. Great! By using the SelectControl component, we have a different option for restricting values. However, if we're dealing with Boolean values, you may want to consider using the toggle control component. There's less hassle with type conversion.